Hey, how's it going?
It is going quite well, I think. I had to think about that for a moment, but I have a really interesting job interview later today, and I'm very, very excited about it. But I'm also like on kind of pins and needles and like can't really focus. So this is a fascinating day to be recording.
Oh,
Um,
man.
yeah.
Well, if we get part of your brain today, I will be happy.
I don't know that I ever have more than that to give, so I doubt it'll be noticeably different. Um, but how are
We,
you doing?
you know what? I am upright, and goodness, so I've been sick the last few days, and not just like sick, but like deliriously can't even sit up, unconscious, kind of sick. And I am on the mend. I am not 100%, but boy, it is nice to sit up and not feel like I'm getting punished for it. So that's how I'm doing.
Good. Well, I'm glad you're better. I just hate that kind of sick where like it just sucks the life out of you.
Oh,
It's just
goodness.
exhausting.
Yes. Yes. But I will say this, like yesterday, I was finally able to eat some food, get some fluids in me, and I could just feel hour by hour all of that start to take effect. And my body just was
Mm.
healing throughout the day. And you're just like, man, this is amazing the way God has created our bodies to bounce back from this stuff. It's pretty cool.
It's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah. So,
That's awesome.
so what is on your mind for today's episode?
Well, you're going to need to talk me off the ledge today, I think.
Wait a minute, you're the
You-
reasonable one on this podcast. Like how are we going to go up from here?
I have no idea. But I was reading a book and I am still going to read it and it's still going to be a great book. But the setup of the book just drove me bonkers. And I think it speaks to so much that I have struggled with evangelicalism, the evangelicalism that I grew up with. And so I just want to really, I want to set this out there and say to you, can we find a better way?
Hmm.
Um, and so the book I'm working my way through is Greg Allison's Historical Theology, which I've wanted to read this book for years because as far as I know, it is the only book that takes the various topics that you would get in a systematic theology and devotes a chapter to each one and then walks you through the entire historical development of that particular theological issue, which is a brilliant idea.
Yeah.
And I could not be more excited to read this book. But as I started to read it, one of the most troubling things about the book is that it started off basically by saying one of the most important reasons to know historical theology is so that you can recognize heresy and know how to combat it.
Hmm.
And I grew up believing that, right? Like, I grew up deeply influenced by the apologetics culture of the 80s and 90s. I read all the apologetics books. But what really struck me is that there is this profound us versus them approach that Allison is taking to his historical inquiry that I think is intriguingly sort of pervasive in the evangelicalism that I grew up in and in many strands of evangelicalism today. And what really struck me and made me deeply uncomfortable with the attitude that says we're right and they're wrong, and we are going to sort of look through history and filter everything based on our theological presuppositions. And we know for a fact that we've got it. And sort of that attitude was this list of people that Allison talks about in the introduction. He has this very interesting quote. He says, "My hope is that the church, and evangelicals in particular, will become as familiar with the giants of the past, Clement of Rome, Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, Martin Luther, Ulrich Zwingli, John Calvin, John Wesley, Karl Barth, as they are with," and then he lists a bunch of modern famous heroes of the faith. Now, this was written well over a decade ago. But listen to this list as they are with Billy Graham, John Piper, J.I. Packer, Chuck Colson, Ravi Zacharias, Al Mohler, and Mark Driscoll. Now, even a cursory searching of that list suggests that while there are some outstanding men on that list, first of all, notably, there are no outstanding women on that list. But second of all, and more concerning to me, is that since the writing of this book, one of these very famous men it has become apparent that his entire ministry was mired in sexual scandal. Another one of them is a major player in the Southern Baptist Convention that since the writing of this book has been mired in sexual scandal. Two others of the men on this list have both been accused of bullying, at a bare minimum, people in their church and have had to step out of ministry, one voluntarily and one involuntarily.
Yeah.
I have to think that the antagonistic way that theology is treated is part and parcel with a cultural approach to evangelicalism that gives us exactly this outcome. Yeah. And I don't know, that makes me really uncomfortable. I feel like reading historical theology, I'm reading a historical text that tells me about what evangelicalism was. And I feel like we're on this precipice where either we are going to double down on being that, or we are going to be something else. And I want to be something else.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel like there's two halves to this conversation. One is just sitting with the problem for a little bit and letting us make sure we fully grasp what the problem is, what the scale of the problem is, what the root of the problem is, and then maybe like how to live into something different. Because here's the thing, like I grew up in similar circles and, theology, good theology, and being able to articulate good theology and protect against heresy was like the gold standard. And there's a part of me that is still very bound to that way of thinking. And I think there are parts of it that are true and good. For instance, Paul even says in Galatians 1:8-9, "But if even we or an angel from heaven should preach to you a gospel contrary to the one we preach to you, let him be accursed. As we have said before, so now I say again, if anyone is preaching to you a gospel contrary to the one you received, let him be accursed." I mean, that's unambiguous, right? You have to follow the true faith that was handed down from Jesus to the apostles and down through the centuries to today. It's not as though every conception of God is equal and every theological conviction is equal. There is truth. We can know something of that truth. We must stand on the truth. Like, I believe all of that. And yet, we as evangelicals have camped out there so strongly that I think we've lost other strands of the faith.
Yeah, well, and in the way that we camp out there, I don't think we have, on the one hand, followed the modeling of Jesus in the way he handled people the majority of the time. And we've said this before, but yes, I understand Jesus had some bad things to say about the Pharisees, and I understand that he flipped over tables in the temple. And those are two examples out of 1,000 about Jesus. And if we harp on those two to the exclusion of the way he was 95% of the time, we may have a problem.
Well, and I would
And
contend we might even be misinterpreting those passages themselves, but that's for another day, I guess.
sure. No, I think that's a fair thought. And on the flip side, I find myself asking, does the way we have loved the truth been consistent with the fruit of the Spirit? Is it loving, joyful, peaceful, patient, kind, gentle, all those kinds of things?
Right.
And I don't think it has been. That's, like I have this moment. You got to tell me if you remember this. Maybe it happened a lot and you just remembered as a generic thing, but I have a moment where I remember us being in a really kind of heated theological debate right in the cafeteria where we both worked when we were in college. And we were standing right by the line where the dirty trays on the little conveyor belt so that they
Uh-huh.
could go back to the dish room, whatever. And we were standing there, and to the best of my recollection, we were arguing at the time about how reformed we ought to be.
Given the fact that that's the only thing we've ever vehemently disagreed with each other on, that's probably true.
Yes. And ironically, I think of you as having stayed fairly in the same basic space on that. And I was at one point far more reformed than you and have somehow ended up far less reformed than you.
I corrupted
And
you.
I orbit you, I think is what happens. But like I was at the time deeply influenced by many of these guys. Like I had read everything John Piper wrote, including, frankly, the giant 2-page footnote that I will never forget, in which he just throws another Christian leader under the bus for a footnote that starts on one page, goes all the way down the next page, so there's no actual text on the next page, then all the way down the page after that. It is the longest footnote I have ever seen, and it is just throwing this guy under the bus. This was my mentoring in how to talk about theology, and I brought that to this conversation, and I was far more heated than was helpful. And I remember more or less what I remember of what you said was, I don't think we have to be that rigid about it. I think it's okay to have a little bit of flexibility in where you stand on certain things. And I was ready and willing to like fight it out for you to agree with me on every little thing, and ready to like completely dismiss everything you had to say if you weren't in the same place as me. And I do not look back on that version of myself with pride. I don't think I helped the conversation. I don't think I helped your theology. I don't think I helped my theology. I don't think anything benefited from my antagonistic approach to that conversation.
Mm.
And so all of that to say, like, I talk about this stuff as an insider, someone who is deeply influenced by not just the theological positions many of these folks have taken, but the theological methodology that they have adopted in the ways that they communicate about theology.
Yes, this resonates with me as well. I think I have always reacted against this in some way. Not to say I've never been dogmatic about something or what have you, but I have a personal reaction to this sort of mentality. And I'll tell you what. So last night, my brain finally kicked on for the first time in a couple of days. I would no longer had the sick fog over me, and my brain just would not shut off last night. And part of that was knowing we were going to have this conversation today. And I got riled up. I got upset. Laying in bed, I'm thrashing it back and forth, trying to fall asleep, and my brain is hot and bothered by what we're about to talk about. And I had to sit down, and I'm really glad I had this experience, because I had to sit down and ask myself, why does this topic bother me so much? Why does it make me so frustrated when theological debates turn that direction? And it occurred to me, why? So I have a significant person in my life that assigned me a label, said, this is who I think you are. And because this is who I think you are, this is just how I expect that you'll behave. This is how I expect you'll respond to things. This is how I expect you will think about things. And I believe that person chose not to actually get to know me because they had a preconceived idea of who I am, how I think, and how I react. Now, this person has a place of significance for me. So it's not as though this is just some Joe off the street that, it wouldn't matter what they think. But it was actually hurtful that somebody this close would not care to know me. And so I get it might have been safer for them to think that, right? Because then I would never act outside of their preconceived ideas. They would never be surprised. They would never have to reformulate their plan or readjust their ideas if I did something that they didn't expect. And that's very safe, and that's very consistent, and there's just no surprises. And I think that's how we think about God and theology inadvertently. I don't think anybody sets out to think this way, and I don't think this person in my life set out to think this way. But I know for me, I put God in a box for a time because it was safer to have a theological construct of God than it was to deal with a person of God who could act contrary to my beliefs. And so if God is like, we'll take your sovereignty issue, right? That we used to disagree about so vehemently. That's a very safe bubble to create. And I'm not saying everybody who, leans more reformed is, thinks this way. I'm just, as an example, it's a very safe theology. God chooses what he chooses. It's all up to him. He does it. I don't have to worry about it. I'm completely depraved. God's in control. It's all him. And that's very safe and comfortable theology. Whether it's true or it isn't true, it just happens to be a very safe and comfortable theology. And God will never act outside of what we expect because God is sovereign. He's in control. He will save who he intends to save. He will not save who he intends to not save, and all of those things, which is very different than dealing with a person of God. So I connect the two. Do I really want to get to know God, or do I want to get to know the conception of God that I have formed through my theological studies? And those are very distinct things that have an emotional linkage for me that is very, very strong.
Boy, okay. I have so many thoughts about what you just said, because I think you just hit it on the head. Hit the nail on the head, not hit the person on the head. We would be opposed to that. But first of all, I think having a good boxed theology, whatever it is, it not only keeps me safe, I think it also gives me a sense of control. I know the answers.
Yeah.
And the older I get, the more I worry about people whose theological starting point is I know the answers.
Mm.
You, before we started recording, referred to that as pride. And I had not thought of it in those terms, but you're absolutely right. There is a pridefulness, particularly in the way that we as evangelicals have done theology, that puts us in a box, puts our theology in a box. It keeps us safe. It keeps us in control. But ultimately, I think the thing it protects us against more than anything else is growth.
Mm. Yes.
So I think that is incredibly insightful. The other thing, I actually thought you were going to make two different points as you were talking about putting our theology in a box. You know, we come back frequently to love God, love your neighbor as kind of got Jesus's basic foundational, what does it mean to be a Christian? Love God, love your neighbor. When you are antagonistic about your theology, you actually put God in a box and you put your neighbor in a box. You are labeling God so that you can't be surprised by him, but you're also labeling your neighbor. Oh, they're reformed. Oh, they're a liberal. Oh, they're a conservative. Oh, they're a Calvinist. Oh, they're a Pentecostal. And it gives you that same sense of safety, simplicity, and control about your neighbor and about God. And I think all of that, I mean, one of the things that bothers me most about that moment in the cafeteria that I mentioned is the poor job that I did at actually listening to you. What is strongest in my memory is how I felt, not anything about you, until the moment you said something to the, I don't remember exactly what, but something that basically said, you're not listening to me.
Mm.
And you didn't say it like rudely or meanly or whatever. You were just saying, why am I talking to you? You're not listening.
Hmm.
That's that box thing you were talking about and how that person puts you in a box. When we do this with our theology, we do that with our neighbor and with God. And it's really, like I said, it protects us from nothing but growth.
Well, you're right. It puts God in a box. We've labeled God and defined him, and he can't surprise us. We've put our neighbor in a box, and that box is labeled wrong. And
it's a dismissive box. You're absolutely right.
Yes. Which contributes to the not listening, because why would I need to listen to somebody who's wrong? I just need to wait to talk again so that I can convince them that they're wrong. And so we put our neighbor in a box, and then we put ourselves in a box, and it's labeled right, safe, and secure. Mm-hmm. And those are very dangerous boxes. They're very categorical boxes. And that's why I think you're right to have said it a couple of times now. What it does is keep us from growth. And I'll tell you what, I'm really surprised by this in the Gospels, right? I think we give the Pharisees a really hard time because they're kind of the bad guys in the New Testament. But we're more like them than we care to admit. And I was translating with John the other day, and we're in the story of the Sadducees coming to Jesus and being like, come on, like you got to admit there's no resurrection, because like, what if there's this guy and he dies and his wife has to marry his brother, and then he dies, and then his wife had to marry the next brother, and that happened 7 times, and now everybody's dead. Now whose wife is he in the resurrection? See, it doesn't make sense, right? This is their theology. This is their theology getting in the way of their growth. And Jesus calls it out right in front of him, and just calls it out for all to hear. He names exactly the problem. This is Matthew 22, verse 29. But answering, Jesus said to them, you are deceived, not knowing either the scriptures nor the power of God. That is as bold a statement as Jesus could possibly make. To people that were steeped in the scriptures, who were so looked upon as experts in knowing God and knowing the scriptures. And he said, you're missing it by a mile. And I think it's because their theology was getting in the way of actually knowing the scriptures and actually knowing the God behind the scriptures.
which then that's a scary verse. Cause right. Like we often will talk about, even in past episodes, we've talked about how you can lean towards theology or lean towards experience or whatever. And Jesus is like, you stink at all of them.
Right.
And let's not forget the fact that they thought they were good at all of them. So the fact that I think my theology is correct is not a sign that it is.
Right.
So this is the model. Are we far enough into exploring this that I can sort of throw my hands up in the air and say, is there another way?
We have to start asking that question, because here's the thing. We need a better way. Here's the thing. We need a way that is less dogmatic, but no less faithful, right? Paul is absolutely right. We must follow the gospel. It's not like we can invent a gospel down the road and it's just as equal to the one that the apostles handed down. There has to be some benchmarks, but
yes,
but we have to find a way to be in dialogue much better and in humility and posture ourselves for growth and all of those things that preserves some boundaries, but also allows for all the other stuff. How do you define that?
I think this is exactly it. I almost want to go as far as to say, you've used words like preserve boundaries and things like that. I want to ask, is there a way of believing in a very clear, concrete, and nuanced, detailed truth that doesn't require me to step into the role of defender of it? Because I think ultimately that's the problem. Like, we're going to talk about somebody in just a couple of minutes here that I think does this really well. And both of us, our instinct is going to be to start off the conversation by saying, well, obviously I don't agree with him on everything, but
yes.
And that feels to me like we are still in the culture that says in any conversation, your job is to differentiate truth from lie, to be the expert, to be the person who can correct everybody else, who can prove why you're right and they're wrong, who can be the defender of the truth. And I'm just curious, is that my job? Just because Paul did it in Galatians, and he did it on a very specific, singular issue, does that make it my job in every conversation all the time? And good gracious on Facebook.
Well, okay, so I guess, is it my job to be the definer of truth? Absolutely not.
Defender. I said defender, not definer.
I know.
Oh,
I'm saying definer of truth.
Okay.
Am I responsible for theologizing? That is to say, a word about God, and to express what I believe I have learned from the Holy Spirit, learned through the scriptures, learned through the church, learned through conversations with believers, learned through my reading. Is it my job to try to point people in the direction that I think truth lies? Yes, but that does not make me the definer of truth, nor maybe even the defender of truth, but a pointer to the truth? Yes. And so I think that's very nuanced. I get that that could be a confusing line to draw, but I don't think we're in a say nothing position. I don't think we're in a let everything be okay position. That's clearly not okay. And so when we talk about this, I'll just name him. When we talk about Richard Rohr, I think it's absolutely appropriate to say, look, Richard Rohr falls pretty much in the universalist camp. And I don't think a Jesus follower can fall into a universalist camp. And so,
see, Sorry, go ahead.
I think anyway, I think that that's where I would speak up and I would point that direction. And it sounds like you might disagree a little bit.
I disagree vehemently enough, and that I whacked my microphone and it went all over the place. So I had to fix my microphone. Hopefully it's in the right place now. But I want to at least push back a little bit is really where I think I land on this. You said, do I need to speak up? Yes. I don't know again that that's the biblical model. There are so many proverbs that say things like Proverbs 17:27. The one who has knowledge uses words with restraint, and whoever has understanding is even-tempered. I think we feel obligated to right errors. And I don't think believing errors exist puts us in the role of error spotlight.
Well, and that's where I think pointing to the truth is very different than correcting all errors, right? If I know that the truth lies in relationship with Jesus Christ and participation in the Trinitarian love of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and if I know that you are on that journey and you are heading that direction, I don't need to correct every little doctrinal error that I see along the way. I just need to keep pushing you that direction. I need to keep pointing you to the truth. So sometimes that means I'm going to need to speak up, but I'm not going to need to speak up all the time. But I also think if we're going to introduce a character like Richard Rohr as a positive example, I do think we should qualify what we mean by what is positive about Richard Rohr.
I actually think you're right about Rohr, because introducing him in a context like this is a tacit endorsement of him. And I want to temper my endorsements on any level, whether it is, I just want to make sure we're coherent on that, right? I would be careful about introducing Richard Rohr, but before this conversation, if I mentioned John Piper, I'm not sure I would be as careful about nuancing my endorsement. And maybe I need to. So I think that's part of it. But I also think part of it, another piece of it, you said if they're on the road and kind of going in the right direction, another piece of it I think is one of the principles that we have as a family, that, and by we have as a family, I mean I have imposed upon my family, is help is only help if it's asked for.
Yeah.
If somebody is on any particular spiritual journey, no matter how right or wrong, if I am not on some level invited into conversation, that is a place that I need to be invited to, not an inherent right that I have as a human being who can expend wind.
Yeah. Okay. Well said.
You know, like I think that's the thing for me is we should never shy away from wrestling confidently and comfortably with the truth. I certainly don't want to fall into the space that I think some liberal traditions fall into of, well, we all generally believe the same thing so we can have a conversation about it, because that rings hollow to me and doesn't lead to good conversation. We can talk about that a different time. But I do want to honor the fact that an invitation is required.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I was answering your question more honestly for the immediacy of this podcast. You know, do we need to say what we say about Richard Rohr for this podcast? And I feel like anybody that has clicked play on this has invited our feedback in some manner, right? And so I think we need to be wise in what we say when giving that feedback.
I totally agree. I mean, and ultimately, like I said, I think I just want to make sure I'm being nuanced in that. I mean, unless it is inspired by God or written by N.T. Wright, I think we should be careful about making sure we nuance it, right?
That was well said. Okay,
Thank
well,
you.
with all of that, I'm actually super curious what you want to say in praise of Richard Rohr.
Okay, so I frequently read books by Richard Rohr, and I certainly do agree that he leans in the universalist arena in some ways that would require a lot of nuancing. I don't know that he would love me calling him a universalist, but I was recently reading, and I think I mentioned this on the podcast at some point, The Divine Dance, The Trinity and Your Transformation.
Hmm.
And it is a phenomenal book. But one of the things that I most deeply appreciate is that Rohr, who is in the Catholic tradition, which is far more tied to history than the Protestant tradition is, Rohr comes to church history in a way that I would call hospitable rather than antagonistic. And he comes to even other traditions, whether it is a story from an Islamic mystic or a held piece of wisdom from a Native American source. He comes to truth from any source in a way that offers hospitality to both the person and the idea. Does that make any sense? Because I don't know that I have ever heard anybody talk about theological hospitality before.
I love the idea of theological hospitality. In fact, as you're talking about it, I'm just, my insides are singing. We just had a great sermon.
That might be because you're still getting over something.
That is true. That is true. I didn't say what kind. It is a death metal song that's happening inside of me. No, we just had this great sermon on Sunday by our pastor. He talked about evangelism from Jesus's perspective, which Jesus's mode of evangelism, if you will, was to share meals with people. And my church is called Table Community Church as a result, because we really want to embody what we call intentional feasting for this very same reason. It's this hospitality idea. And when you talk about theological hospitality, I think about this great quote that our pastor shared in the service. I wish I remember who he was quoting, but the quote was, Jesus' whole evangelistic strategy came down to this: Jesus ate great food with bad people. And that to me is just awesome. That is so awesome. I don't care if you're a pagan that worships Zeus. I don't care if you're a Calvinist that worships sovereignty. I don't care who you are. I will sit down and share a meal with you. We will converse. We will, and their idea of sharing a meal was not, all right, let's sit down for 5 minutes together as a family and then let's go up and grab our iPads and split to separate rooms, right? This was hours of sitting around a table, sharing conversation together. This was good food and good wine, and sometimes with bad people. That's just awesome.
Well, all the time with bad people, because it was okay for everybody to acknowledge that they were bad.
Yes.
Right? That's the beautiful thing that happened when Jesus broke through the barrier.
Right.
Suddenly everybody could admit they were actually on the other side of the barrier, and it was okay.
Yes. And if we go all the way back to what you were talking about earlier about being in our boxes and our boxes keeping us from growth, it's because God's in a box and he's not going to surprise me. The other is in a box and that's labeled wrong. I'm in a box and it's called safe, right, and secure. And when we sit down at Jesus's table, or when we put an egalitarian table together and we can all just admit we're wrong and God's right, that primes us for growth.
Well, and this, to build off this model of the table, Rohr offers a very interesting meta-theological criticism, really the way we're putting our theology together. He suggests that we build our theology more or less in a pyramid shape, with God at the top and everybody else at varying levels below. Does that kind of make some level of sense?
Yeah, I'm wondering what accounts for the various levels of each person.
So he Rohr's and Rohr is not going to affirm this. So, but he's just more or less the point he's making is God is up, we are down. Sure, maybe priests or pastors or whoever are up more. Maybe holier people like saints are up more. And there's certainly fewer and fewer of those kinds of people the higher up you get. But ultimately, God's at the top.
Okay. Yeah.
And the primary focus is God is at the top of a pyramid. And he suggests that is actually really how Greek polytheistic theology thought of Zeus. Zeus is at the top and he can do whatever he wants, and we're all just somewhere down the food chain. Coming back to this idea of table, Rohr suggests, and this is what the whole book is based on. The book is really a long meditation on Rublev's icon, the Holy Trinity, which,
Yes.
if you are listening, feel free to Google that. But if you are picturing a really, really old picture of the Trinity, you're probably picturing the right one. It's quite famous. He suggests that if we see the Trinity as the foundational nature of the universe, the Trinity is best understood as a circle. It is not a triangle where the Father is at the top and the Son and the Spirit are somehow beneath him. Rather, it is a circle where selfless love leads all persons within the Trinity to sacrificially do whatever they can for one another. And that by extension, if that is the nature of the Trinity, that is the nature of reality that we are invited into. We're invited into a reality that is best understood as a circle. There is no point. There is just this ongoing flow of sacrificial love from person to person that never ends.
Mm.
And if that's the nature of reality, I think that hospitable churches, a hospitable theology, really matches that sense of reality better than what we have been doing. What do you think about that? Because I thought those two images of pyramid or triangle and circle communicate something pretty profound.
I totally agree, and I love this idea of circle, especially the interpenetration of the Trinity and us, and how that plays out at the table. Yeah, hospitable theology. I just love it. I think here's the thing. I grew up in circles that would be very uncomfortable with that terminology. And I think it's from what we talked about earlier. There's a lack of control there. I don't get to just say these are the bounds of truth and we're going to live into that and no dissension is allowed, right? It's scarier than that. It's less certain than that. And I think the great fear is that it will slip into apostasy, that it will slip into error. So I think that part of our audience is still going to be very uncomfortable with this idea of hospitable theology. And I wonder if you have something that you would like to say in regards to that fear.
Yeah, this is where perhaps my pastoral training sets me up to see things just a tad bit differently. When I was pastoring people, there were so often people that by definition, I was in a relationship where I was discipling them. And still, I overlooked the majority of the things that they said that were theologically wildly off. There's the person who just lost their husband and they say with like tears streaming down their face at the funeral as I'm giving them a hug, my husband's an angel now. No, he's not.
Mhm.
Now's not the time. There's the person I sit with in a pastoral meeting where they are wrestling with one specific issue. And along the way, I hear them misexplain how the cross works and how grace works and exactly who the Holy Spirit is and like 15 other things. Am I going to stop and correct them theologically on every single one of those things? And so I had to begin to practice. And again, this is where that verse I quoted from Proverbs comes in, a willingness to pursue wisdom, which means I know there is a truth, but that doesn't mean I have to say anything about it. And I think this is one of the fascinating things to me is that the discipline of silence as a spiritual discipline in the Bible is so frequently a public discipline, not a private one. I am someone who practices the spiritual discipline of silence all the time when I'm alone. I sit in silence. I really desperately need silence. So I'm not saying anything bad about that. But the Bible speaks highly of practicing the public discipline of silence, of having something to say and not saying it. And I think this is the thing that matters. We're not talking about what is true. We're talking about being able to hold my tongue and pursue wisdom in the discipline of silence rather than having to just say stuff. Am I
Yeah,
addressing at all the thing that you're saying?
you are. And let me give the other side of the equation, because I think there's a temptation to feel like, well, that's just foolishness. That's just letting people be caught in their own errors and never awakened to their own wrong thinking. And I think what makes it a wise decision is the fact that there's still a Holy Spirit and we're not him. And if we truly believe in the power of the Holy Spirit to convict, the power of the Holy Spirit to apply Jesus' teachings to us, then I think your caution about when to speak and when to remain silent is wise.
Absolutely. Well, and there is one of the sneaky things about this approach comes, I guess, again, from some coaching. I coach a lot of folks who have ADHD. And one of the things I often tell the folks I coach who have ADHD is, I just want you to know, I'm not going to make any suggestions or give you any advice in the entire time we're working together, unless you absolutely force me to. And they often will say, but don't you know a lot of really good solutions? I'll say, yeah, I know a ton of really good solutions. One of the intriguing character traits of folks who have ADHD is that they have something called oppositional defiant disorder. Whatever you say to do, they just want to do the opposite. So if I tell you to make a list, you're going to want to do anything but make that stupid list. And the fact of the matter is, we all have some level of oppositional defiance. As an aside, I just want to say to my wife, I know it when I said that you were thinking to yourself, no, I don't. And I just want to say my wife may be the single human being who doesn't. But the vast majority of us, if we are told to go left, something in us wants to go right. And when we start fixing people's theology, what we're actually doing is engaging their oppositional defiance. We're turning them, like they're just planting their hooves and pushing back on us, right? They turn it into a tug of war instead of an opportunity to engage.
Well, right, because it's not safe to be wrong. It's become adversarial. And in an adversarial posture, it's not safe to be wrong. But with theological hospitality, it is absolutely safe to be wrong. And maybe I'm a little bit more sensitive to the Spirit as a result.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this is good. This is more in line. I said earlier, I'm not sure that the model we were offered as teenagers, I'm not sure that it was consistent with the character of Jesus or the fruit of the Holy Spirit. This, to me, feels more consistent with both.
Yes, I agree.
Man, well, are you ready to completely derail this deeply meaningful conversation?
Oh my gosh. It pains me every single week. Okay. Hard left it is. Yeah, let's see. We have a Which Josh question somewhere around here. Which Josh needs a remedial tutorial on how to use a burn barrel?
Okay, so this is me. And I just want to say, I fully acknowledge that using a burn barrel should not be complicated. And that all of the directions are literally built into the name. You put stuff in the barrel and you burn it. How hard could it be?
I'm eager to find out.
I would love to say that I just have a dumb story about how I messed up using a burn barrel, but I have several. So the first time when we got a burn barrel, I don't know, a year ago, whatever. The first time I misused the burn barrel, I was burning stuff, whatever. It was going to rain, and the barrel that I bought came with a cover that you could seal it. It had been like a molasses container, like a molasses drum or something. Right. And so it came with this like fully sealing cover. And so I finished burning everything in the burn barrel, and it was going to rain, and I didn't want water to fill up the burn barrel. So I threw the cover on it and sealed the cover shut and went in and did a coaching session. And about halfway through the coaching session, everybody in the house hears this. Boom!
This is so good.
Yeah, this is where I am clearly too suburban for my own good, because I'm imagining many people know what happened. But as the air from the remainder of the fire inside the burn barrel got burned up, the pressure inside the barrel was significantly less than the pressure outside the barrel. And the barrel literally just got sucked in on itself. The barrel imploded.
Mm-hmm.
And that's awesome. But now I have a not functional burn barrel sitting next to my other burn barrel. So that happened. And then several months later, again, Rain and I are not friends in this situation. I had thrown some stuff in there. It was misting. It was mostly dry, but I knew it was going to be hard to light. So I was like, you know what? I've done this a bunch of times. I threw a little bit of gasoline in there just to like light it. And I light it on fire, and it just, again, if you've ever lit gasoline on fire, it did what gasoline does when you light it on fire. Mm-hmm. And it literally singed my eyebrows, all of my hair. Like I had like burns on my face, like not horrible burns, but like significant sunburn burns on my face. I was just like, my family almost disbarred me from using the burn barrel because I am clearly not qualified.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so you need to look up this short story that is absolutely hilarious, and you'll love the title of it. It is called Poof, No Eyebrows.
I have experienced this.
I clearly. But anyway, you will relate to this this short story very well, and it's beautifully written.
All right. Well, I will look forward to reading Poof, No Eyebrows. In the meantime, are we on for next week?
We are on for next week. I'm looking forward to it.
All right. I will talk to you then.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.